Namaste. Welcome to this session. We have been dealing with Abhyasa, the effort to be steady the mind, be calm the mind, and more precisely, to be steady the chitta, the whole of mind stuff, and to be calm the mind, chitta, the whole of mind stuff. But anyway, as I have been telling you, that our practices start with our peripheral mind, surface mind, and therefore we can as well say that it is these are efforts to be steady the mind, because unless we be steady the mind, be calm the mind, there is no way that we can be doing that to the chitta. Well, so these efforts are uh, by yoga. I made it clear perhaps in the last session that yoga itself is means and yoga itself is an end. One form of yoga, facet of yoga, level of yoga, grade of yoga is the means. And then we try to attain the yoga through yoga. Yogat yoga pravartate is the theorem which comes in Adhyatma Shastra. So, our yoga as means comes in the form of needed conditions, associated conditions of body, mind, breath, senses. It's an integral approach. The efforts are integral. These are not physical efforts or mental efforts as usually we understand in our worldly realm. Their efforts are either physical or mental, or the efforts are physical or intellectual or mental or emotional, etc. But these are integrated efforts, unified efforts. That is the kind of yoga. When these forces come together and get associated, come together and get needed, and come together and get unified, that itself is yoga. So that is yoga coming as means. And with that, we try to again commence our yoga, proceed to our yoga. So we attain yoga through yoga. So while we are discussing with the efforts to be steady the mind, we should know that efforts are also of the form of yoga, and then what is attained through that is also form of yoga. So we need to look at the idea that means yoga coming as means, and yoga coming as an end. So that's a unique thing here. In other realms that of our endeavor, it is not like that. If you want to attain something physically, then you start using your mind, will, resoluteness, intent, diligence, etc., etc. So through the mind, we try to make efforts when the body is an end. When the mind is an end, we try to make our body as a means. So this is how we are used to that the means and end are not of the same entity. They are not same entity. Whereas in Adhyatma, this is a unique thing that we need to understand. Now, what are the means that we apply has to be considered by each one, because in one sense I said that the means would be differing between young ones, old ones, middle-aged ones, ripe old-aged ones, men and women, strong and weak, intelligent and unintelligent, good-minded and not so good-minded or bad-minded, virtuous and vicious. So, as I told you, that this becomes very complicated to really understand what are the means. The point is, the means must be uh, composed by oneself. But as I said, when you are getting prepared for yoga, you are not dealing with these very peripheral conditions which are having distinguishing factors on the basis of caste, class, creed, gender, status, race, age, condition, etc., etc., etc. So, in the little internal realm, when you really get prepared for yoga, they these delimiting factors and distinguishing factors really fall apart. As long as they are not really falling apart, we have not really embraced the means of yoga. If you feel while you are practicing you are young, or you are not so young, or you are old, or you are a man or you are a woman, or you are strong or you are weak, as long as these things are very much on the surface, it should be taken to understand that we have not really taken recourse to yoga. So we need to get better prepared for yoga so that we do away with these distinguishing factors by way of caste, class, creed, race, gender, status, stature, etc., or age group like child, teenager, young, adult, old, etc., or the gender, or the conditions such as strong and weak, healthy, unhealthy, etc. So, as long as these distinguishing factors are very much on the surface, our yoga has not really commenced. So, we need to overcome these conditions and get prepared in yoga, and then that becomes the means yoga: unified condition, integrated conditions, free from delimitations. And we have such a state as, let me tell you once again, that we only identify ourselves by with this delimitation: I am man, woman, young, old, strong, weak, intelligent, unintelligent, well to do, not so well to do, etc., etc., etc. But then in the state of sleep, we do exist, but we are just beings. We don't have a state of being. We are just beings. And therefore we really exist without these delimiting bubbles on us, or attachment to us, or parasites on us. Actually, these are all parasites to our essential subjective entity, like age, gender, condition, etc. These are all parasites, because we are free from these while we are in sleep. We do exist in sleep, but they are not there. That means it is possible that they are not there. And this is what you need to understand in preparation of yoga. Become prepared for yoga, we need to come to such a state. Until that time, it is either run up or we are not at all in the path of yoga. Therefore, then whatever we have discussed so far, these means come very handy. So that is one thing that we need to be considering. The second one is, how are the efforts? Whatever are the efforts, how are the efforts? Efforts are either through by body, by mind, by speech, according to Adhyatma, Kaya, Vacha, Manasaha. So Tatra Yatnaha, when Patanjali says Tatra Yatnaha, that Yatna means effort. The effort is Kaya, Vacha, Manasa as far as the Adhyatmic scheme is concerned. So we get a clue that it cannot be just physical or mental endeavor or effort. The vachik effort is so important. The vachika prayatna, vachika yatna is so important. And the vacha means not only our express speech as an oratory organ, but it is chaturvidha speech. Para pashyanti madhyama vaikhari. So express speech and silent speech and something that underlies our speech, that is the thought matter under our speech, which underlies the speech. And then para, something metaphysical. So basically it should be kaya, vacha, manasa, prayatna. Now kaya means what? Motor and cognitive system. We have motor system and cognitive system. So the effort must again be looked at in this way, that there are efforts of cognitive organs of the body and cognitive organs of the body. So for instance, if you take ahimsa or one of the yamas or one of the niyamas, it would be too shallow to consider that these are physical activities. There are something physical component, as we discussed last time. So to be practicing ahimsa, we need to understand it should be kaya, vacha, manasa. What does it mean to be kaya, vacha, manasa? Shaucha, etc. niyamas, kaya, vacha, manasa. Asana, pranayama, adi, etc. Because our practices are yama, niyama, asana, pranayam primarily at our levels. Our efforts are by way of some ahimsadi, shauchadi, asana and pranayam. Now therein we have to identify these components, that they are there. Kaya, vacha, manasa components significantly there. Now, at this point in time, we have to understand that these yama niyamas are not moral ethical principles. Because if ahimsa, satya, etc. are practiced as moral ethical principle, they do not ensure quietness of the mind. Those who are moral ethical practitioners or those who are moralists and ethicalists, by their practices you can't really say that they have a quiet mind and they have steady mind. Those are moral ethical practices. They are for morality and ethicality. And therefore, nowhere we can trace that they are means to be steady the mind or be calm the mind. More often we see that those who are in these moral ethical practices and out of idealism, as a norm if they practice, there is more turbulence in their mind, tumult in their mind. They are disquiet in the mind. Perhaps what we sometimes we say, those outspoken people, those who speak out, etc., etc., they have little peace of mind, we say. But those who are not going to do that, and they are going to suppress, to be practicing the norms, they will be suppressing any impulse for himsa, asatya, etc. It is suppression. To be practicing norms is suppression of tendencies, because these are all natural tendencies to be in himsa, asatya, steya, abrahmacharya, parigraha. These are all natural tendencies, and these are restraints. They are called restraints. So when you are restraining for morality, ethicality purpose, that means you are suppressing. Now, if you are suppressing the natural tendencies, you cannot be seeing any quietude coming in the mind. Mind cannot be quiet. Mind will not be quiet. So therefore, these yama niyamas, once again at this juncture we understand that Patanjali doesn't mean to say that you must practice this morality, ethicality. In fact, morality, ethicality has to be practiced by anyone if one should be proving that one is a human being. But the Yama Niyamas mentioned in yoga are not moral ethical principles. This I have been telling you often. So, if you practice ahimsa, it doesn't mean that you will have peace of mind. Peace of mind. If you practice satya, it doesn't mean that you have peace of mind. Perhaps you might have little turbulent mind conditions because these are all tendencies and we try to restrain them. But then how is ahimsa satya means of yoga here? So then what is suggested is that not practice ahimsa satya asteya brahmacharya aparigraha, but inculcate values of ahimsa satya asteya brahmacharya aparigraha. Inculcate and imbibe the philosophy behind ahimsa satya asteya brahmacharya aparigraha. These are values. So if we try to practice the values, then we will be developing the potentials for the mind to be quiet. But if you are just practicing them, moral ethical principles, then we are suppressing. And if we are suppressing, there will be tumult. So at this juncture, we can again understand and get convinced that ahimsa satya asteya as means of for yoga would mean that inculcating philosophy or behind it, values, value inculcation, because if you inculcate value, you will have quieter mind. So know the difference between practicing values and inculcating values. Practicing values can create tumult because we practice values without really qualification to be practicing values. That's why we have to suppress. But if you inculcate values, you start developing qualifications, capacities, resources to be practicing values. So Yama Niyamas, again we understand in this juncture that they are ethico-religious principles, means we have to inculcate the values. Now Yama Niyamas which come in yoga therefore have a unique characteristic, because see, Yama Niyamas can be practiced in Dharma Marga, Niti Marga, Adarshavad and Tapas, Tapasi Marga. So these are principles which can be practiced as a part of practicing virtuosity. So it can be dharma sadhana. Yama Niyamas can come as dharma sadhana. Yama Niyamas can come as niti sadhana. Niti sadhana means morality, ethicality practices, moral ethical practices. Adarshavad sadhana, Adarshavad means idealism. To be practicing idealism, again Yama Niyamas can be practiced. Or tapasadhana, as tapasadhana they can come and as practices. But here it is yoga sadhana. So what is the characteristic difference between Yama Niyamas to be means of yoga or means of restraint and means of abhyasa or efforts for abhyasa is that while you are in ahimsa, you have to take care, you have to see that you ensure that your mind is quiet. The mind will inculcate or develop quietude potentials. Even if the mind is not actually quiet, that it is generating quietude potentials. You must not be vexed while you are practicing ahimsa, satya, because this is what happens to the moralist and ethicalist. While they practice these principles, they are tormented, there is a fretting and fuming in them, they are at a discomfiture. It's not that they are happily practicing morality, ethicality, because there is a kind of dogma they have that they must practice it, or they have a kind of status consciousness Therefore, they want to practice it. And when they practice it, there is a tumult built in, there is turbulence built in. So it should be noted that in case if you are practicing yama niyamas as part of Ashtanga Yoga, then these practices should be such that while you are practicing, you have to ensure the mind is quiet, the mind is going to become quieter and quieter and quieter. So mind is quietened and mind will be quietening. So that degree of ahimsa one should practice. Suppose you try to practice ahimsa to a degree that you are not qualified, incapacitated, then naturally it will be creating combustion, it will be creating kind of discontent or unhappiness, or the vexation by way of suppression, or by way of you are trying to project that you are very, very moral, ethical, to the extent that you are not actually. So therefore, you should commensurate with your resources, capacities, abilities, qualifications. Because many times these moralists, ethicalists go overboard in practicing morality, ethicality. So it becomes a combustion, it becomes a kind of turbulence and tumult, churned up, boiling up. So if you are practicing yama niyamas, you have to see that they are practiced with the profile of the mind which is quiet, serene, placid, and can go to more placid condition, quiet condition, serene condition. And those are therefore ethico-religious principles and not moral ethical principles. So that because we know that to be practicing yoga, the yama niyamas are means. Without adhering to yama niyamas, if you start practicing subsequent limbs, then that is subject to criticism, and people will be critical about you that you don't even practice yama niyamas, but then you are practicing your yoga in the form of asana, pranayama, etc. So when the yama niyamas they are coming as means, and they must come as means, but they must come as means in this way, where we have to take care to see that we are not trying to project ourselves as moralist, ethicalist, but we are trying to ensure that we have this quietude of the mind. And then I told you about asanas, and asanas how you have the process of it, the dynamics of it, which can churn out the quietude or quietude potential or steadiness of the mind. So finally, let me tell you that if moralists, ethicalists are practicing these principles, they lose the steadiness of the mind, whatever they have. And certainly they will not be able to build up steadiness out of their moral ethical practices. So the yama niyamas have to come in different packaging in yoga, and not the packaging that is there for moral ethical normative sciences. They don't take this care. They practice morality for the sake of morality, ethicality for the sake of ethicality, morality, ethicality for the sake of that you must become a trustworthy person for society. The people must give you a status that you are morally and ethically reliable person and strong person. But when they are practicing yoga, this aspect should be understood, that it gives steadiness of the mind. Now, steadiness of the mind, if you recall, I said the steadiness depends upon certain factor. We considered why the mind is unsteady. The mind is unsteady because it is desirous. Mind is unsteady because it is having aspirations. So, what is to be understood here, that the desirelessness must be there. You can't say that a moralist and ethicalist is a desireless person. They don't bother about being desireful. They want to suppress their desires and then have their morality, ethicality in place. So, desirelessness. That means this effort to be steady the mind turns out very major component of vairagya. Now, is that happening? Has to be identified, must be cited that it is turning out vairagya component, vairagya potentials. So, effort to be steady the mind also implies that it will turn out desirelessness. It will also mitigate sensuality. It will also mitigate the sense gratificatory tendency. It should not add to that. It should not be making it more potent. The sensory gratification tendency. So it is important to ascertain that any effort that is taking place in yoga to be steady the mind and be calm the mind is definitely turning out vairagya potentials, desirelessness, thirstlessness, dispassionateness. Then only that will be genuine effort to be steady the mind, which yoga is speaking about. So any effort to be steady the mind should be turning out vairagya potentials. Now, if you look at our worldly measures that we take sometimes to be steady the mind, when the mind is turbulent and we are vexed by our own mind, we want to have steadiness in our mind. What do we do? What measures do we take? So, those are measures which really don't encourage or do not complement or contribute for vairagya. Like as I said, when the mind is disquiet, we go to shopping, we go to entertainment, we go to recreations. Many people, when the mind is vexed and tense, they go to a restaurant even. Where we are going to gratify, the gratification will be taking place. And therefore, when you are trying to adhere to certain means to be steady the mind, be calm the mind, this is the way to test it, whether it is right means or wrong means. That it should never add to our passion potential. It should never add to our raga, in the sense attachment, or the sensuality, or desirelessness. So it should certainly be encouraging desirelessness. It should certainly contribute for desirelessness in us. Now that is the signature condition of effort to be steady the mind, be calm the mind. If this signature condition is not there, then that is not the means in the framework given by Patanjali. So that's a test that it should be generating vairagya. So also it becomes a test for vairagya. To be testing vairagya, the vairagya must be steady the mind, because there are so many dispassions or so many kind of renunciations and give up kind of things, renunciation kinds of things, which really create tumult in the mind. So in that case, the vairagya is not yoga adhered vairagya or yoga advocated vairagya. There are so many vairagyas where they go for suppression, suppressing the desires or whiplashing the desires. And that's how the vairagya is practiced many times. So in that case, that is not the vairagya of yoga as means. That is vairagya out of some idealism, out of some obsession, or status, for the sake of status, that people should say that you are really dispassionate person, thirstless person, you are ascetic, mendicant, etc., etc. That you are very simple and moderate and temperate person, etc. So that's a compliment which comes from society. If you are temperate person, you get compliments. If you are moderate person, you get compliments. So many times people practice those things to get applauded, acclaimed, that you are temperate, you are moderate. But then that's not vairagya, which comes as a means of yoga. So for uh, means of yoga to be proper, in the realm of abhyasa, that is effort to be steady the mind, it should be vairagya generator. And the other means, which is vairagya, should be generator of abhyasa. By your vairagya, your mind should be becoming quieter, quieter and quieter and quieter. All vairagyas don't do that. There are vairagyas which come in asceticism, and one must really read the life of the great sage Vishwamitra. Vishwamitra. Every student of yoga should be familiar with the life of Vishwamitra. He got caught in passion, then he resolved that the passion is painful and that is destroying my tapas, or whatever values I am turning out of my tapas. They are all being destroyed. And therefore, he, with volition and resolution and resoluteness, banished kama in him. So it was what you call as mind over matter. So he did really did overcome his passion, his lust, by resoluteness, by the fire of his resoluteness, by the fire of his determination, by fire of his austerities. But then later what happened was that the anger was boiling up, anger was getting built up. He was suppressing his passion, but the anger was getting built up. So he realized that also. Because in yoga psychology or in essential psychology, the anger is a sprout on desire. It is sprout on lust. Those who get angry easily, that means they have expectation. They expect something. They have desires. Very desirous people. And if they are more they are desirous, the more they are prone to get angry. Sangat sanjayate kamaha kamat krodho vijayate is the precept that comes in Bhagavad Gita. The Rajaguna Sangha brings kama, and kama brings krodha. So if the krodha is there, that means there is the potential kama is there. This can be really one should be assured of. One can be assured of. So the vairagya should be such that it is bestowing steadiness of the mind, or bestowing the calm conditions in the mind, calm, serene, quiet conditions in the mind. Otherwise, whatever vairagya is not doing it or doing the opposite of it, that is not the vairagya as the means of yoga. All vairagya are not means of yoga. All abhyasa are not means of yoga. The abhyasa which is vairagya producer and vairagya which is abhyasa producer are only the means, because there are so many abhyasa practices which do not turn out vairagya, and there are so many vairagya means which do not turn out abhyasa, potential. So this is what we have to understand here to really crystallize what is abhyasa and what is vairagya. So at this point in time, we should understand that the efforts to be steady the mind should be kaya, vacha, manasa. Efforts to be steady the mind should be in associated, unified conditions of our embodiment. And the efforts to the be steady the mind should be coming through every aspect of our embodiment, the body, mind, senses, mental organs, physical organs, body organs, sensory organs, cognitive systems. So they should all be in the effort. They should all be participating in the effort, or they should be all composing the effort, or they should be contributing for effort. It cannot be just physical effort to be steady the mind, or just mental effort to be steady the mind. So that is another thing that we have to understand. Now, if you look at the body and mind, usually our efforts are based on the body matter, body organism, or mind matter and mind organism. But you should know that body has at its roots tendencies. There are sharira vasanas. There are vasanas where the body is locus. There are vasanas where the mind is locus. Then the body and mind have a genetic background. The body, mind both have genetic background, genealogical background, ethnic background, karmic background. Our karmas. So our karmas are really the material of our physical existence and mental existence, or our body organs and mind organs, body organism and mind organism. So the karmas. So therefore you can understand how there is limitation in these means. If you are going to have all means turned out from body and mind, then we are fraught with this kind of danger and this kind of limitations. So yoga explores that agency within us, which doesn't have genetic background, which doesn't have karmic background, which doesn't have tendency background, which doesn't have karmic background. What is it? Breath. So somewhere you have to understand the marvel of this breath. The breath doesn't have any backgrounds. Gravity is working on it. Body has countless gravities, mind has countless gravities. There are lots of delimiting forces on body and mind, shackles on body and mind. The influencing backgrounds and gravities on the body and mind, but not on the breath. The breath doesn't have genetic background. Breath doesn't have genealogical background. Breath doesn't have ethnic background. Breath doesn't have karmic background. So this is an instrument given to us that there is no karmic background. Otherwise your body has karmic background, senses have karmic background, mind has karmic background, intelligence has karmic background, physical organism, mental organism, they all have karmic background. The breath doesn't have karmic background. The breath doesn't have delimiting factors. The breath doesn't have caste, class, creed, gender, status, stature, etc., which body and mind do have. They cannot be free from all that. But the breath doesn't have. Now it is not only that the breath doesn't have, the breath also mitigates such gravities, nullifies the gravities on body and mind. That is why the breath is such an important aspect in yoga, and all efforts in yoga. The breath is so important. So if there is abhyasa aspect, The breath must be taking a lead role. The breath must be a prominent agency for any effort to be steady the mind and calm down the mind, and not as one would think that the mind should take a major step or body should take a major step to be calm the mind and be steady the mind. The breath is so important, and the breath also has a touchstone effect. It is a catalyst. It will nullify all those gravities on body and gravities on mind, which otherwise have tremendous force on body mind organisms, body mind organs, body and mind aspects of our embodiment. So the breath will mitigate that. And therefore, any measure, any means, now here the effort to be steady the mind, see, understand how the breath is important. Then the effort to dispassionate the mind, the breath is important. Usually dispassion is practiced by mind, by will, by volition, by psychological mental agencies. One tries to practice dispassion, but nobody identifies the breath. Breath has that magic touch. Breath itself is dispassionate agency, personified dispassion, and the breath has also that touchstone effect for the body matter and mind matter, that it can really infuse dispassion and thirstlessness. So understand, yogic efforts are so much pranic, so much of the nature of breath and breathing, which a common man is not aware. He thinks the yoga is something mental, chaitic practice of the mind, of the consciousness. So they try to constitute all the measures and means by consciousness and mind stuff and mind matter. And the breath is not at all considered, or it doesn't occur to their minds, whereas the breath is so important. So in this prayatna, in this yatna, in this effort, we must identify the prominent role of breath, breath process, breath functions, breath touches for both abhyasa and vairagya. So I went roundabout to finally come to this statement to tell you that breath is so important in all means and measures of yoga. Breath and prana are so important in all means and measures and all efforts in yoga. It is not just physical effort, it is not just mental effort, it is effort of the associated breath, and then it works marvelously on associated body, associated mind, associated senses. Anyway, the point is that this abhyasa is vairagya generator. So that is important signature condition of the abhyasa in yoga, that it must be vairagya generating effort, vairagya gravitating effort. So that's the signature condition of abhyasa if it is yogic. Now if you try to have your own assessment, like we all in the very preparatory phases, or say formative phases of our yoga, we don't look at this potential, that all efforts we are making, more often our efforts are turning out passion. I must get more of this, I must get better of this, my asana should improve, my pranayam should improve. There is a passion to get better pranayam, better asana and better meditation. That means there is desirousness. We are desirous rather than being desireless. So this will be a great guideline to really shape out our efforts, that it should not be bubbling out passion to even attain yoga, to get yoga. The passion is passion. Passion is cancerous. So there is no point in having even that passion for even your case of yoga, that you want to get yoga, you want to be succeeding in yoga. We have to take care to see that the passion potentials are not bubbling up by what we do, by whatever efforts we are putting in, by all dynamics that we have in place. So that's the signature condition of abhyasa. Now, with the fact that I said that it should be vairagya generating effort, now let us try to proceed to the other aspect of the means. In the pair of abhyasa vairagya, let's try to have little more attention and focus and delineation on the vairagya aspects, which is the other means of yoga. So at the outset, I will tell you that vairagya endeavor, vairagya effort should be having abhyasa potentials, that is, potentials to be steady the mind and be calm the mind, steady the mind, and not really have eruptions on the mind or eruption potentials in the mind. So that's again signature condition of means to be dispassionating the mind. So let's now take up that. The other aspect of vairagya, we went quite in details to abhyasa component of the measures, the means. Now let's try to justify the vairagya or the effort to dispassionate the mind. It's not that you must be having dispassion in your mind, there are means to be dispassionate. So let us try to take that up, but that is next time. Namaskar, all of you.